Every year, the President of the United States gives a State of the Union address. What we'd like to do on What Catholics Believe is to give an annual moral State of the Union. How does the United States measure up in dealing with key moral issues to the standards proposed to us in the Gospels and by the Holy Catholic Church? I'm Julius Smetona. This is What Catholics Believe. Today, to discuss the moral State of the Union 1990, are with me three priests who celebrate the traditional Latin Mass exclusively, and Father William Jenkins, pastor of St. Teresa of the Child Jesus Church in Parma, Ohio, Father Clarence Kelly, spiritual director of St. Joseph's Novitiate in Round Top, New York, and Father Thomas Marachka, pastor of St. Anne Church in White Bear Lake, Minnesota. Reverend Fathers, one issue which has now become more and more public, which perhaps would have been undreamed of, is the introduction of euthanasia. Already I hear there is a measure in the state of Washington, a petition to put this issue on the ballot. And I believe in the state of Michigan there was a doctor who developed a euthanasia machine which has been used by a person in committing suicide. How do you identify this issue? What's your reaction to it?
Well, first, Julius, if a person could claim, if a woman could claim that she has the right, the sole and absolute right over the use of her body, and no one else has that right, and she can have an abortion and commit murder, it's only logical, then, to say that if God does not have a right over my body and have dominion over my body, it's only logical to conclude, then, that I can destroy another human life. There was a doctor that told me a little while ago, he was doing his residency in St. Mary's in Minneapolis, and about 2 years ago, and he told me, Father, he said, just as abortion was the burning issue in the 70s and in the 80s, is that euthanasia will be the burning issue in the 90s and 2000 and beyond. And it's just a logical result of the moral decay that has been prevalent since, really, I think, since the introduction of the reforms of the Vatican II Council.
The problem is that people do not do things based upon principles. They do things based upon expediency. If you establish the fundamental principles, then it is easy to determine what to do. If you operate on a kind of gut feeling about what you should or shouldn't do, you're in very serious problem. And that is one of the reasons why we have now this crisis with regard to euthanasia. And down the road, we will have another crisis, which is a compulsory euthanasia. That is to say, imposing it on people that society deems undesirable. For example, very old people or very sick people that society would say they do not have the mental capacity to determine whether or not their life is valuable or their life is good, and therefore children who may be sick and tired of looking after them would then go to the government, and the government would give them some type of sanction to do this. Then, of course, down the road, you also have then problems with other undesirables, maybe crippled children, maybe people who belong to certain groups, towards whom there is a great deal of animosity in society. And all of that is perfectly logical, because the pro-death movement in the United States, and that is what it is not a pro-choice movement. It is a pro-death movement. As we would say, for example, if there were a group of people that said, I think you should be able to decide whether you should or should not have slaves. We would not say they are pro-choice people with regard to slavery. We would say they are pro-slave people. And the people who are in favor of abortion are pro-death people. But they have a fundamental principle. The vast majority of people in the middle do not have a principle. Those who understand Catholic moral teaching have a principle. Those who understand and are behind the pro-death movement, they have a principle. The people in the middle have no principle. The pro-death people say, essentially, maybe not in these words, but in fact, they say that human life is not sacred. It is not sacred, therefore it is expendable. It is expendable depending upon circumstances. Therefore, you can take the life of the unborn child, you can take the life of the old man or the old woman, and in the future you can take the life of the undesirable. The great mass of people in the middle, they are sort of unprincipled, and they are led along by the mass media to a great extent, and perhaps are influenced by some moral background, some training in the past. They say, well, let's do it a little. Let's grant the right to kill babies up to a certain point. Or let's grant the right to certain people to take their own lives. They don't understand that once they grant that, then there is no stopping the pro-death people. The people who understand the nature of murder, who understand the nature of human life, they know that it is intrinsically evil to directly take innocent life, no matter what circumstances are, whether it's the innocent life of an unborn baby, whether it's the innocent life of a mother, whether it's the innocent life of some sick person who is not able to speak for themselves. So, because this great mass of people in the middle do not operate according to principle, we are in a position for the utter ruination and destruction of any moral fiber left in American society, because the pro-death people have a principle, that is something from which they operate, and that from which they operate is that human life is not sacred. There's no essential difference between a dog or a cat or a human being. The only essential difference is who has the power, who pulls the political strings, who has the upper hand, and who can dictate who will live and who will die.
It's interesting that you mention that, Father Kelly, because someone who is now a vegetarian said, what right do we have to kill animals? And in a further conversation, when I told him I used fertilizer, he was very upset because I was wrecking the earth, even though it was an organic fertilizer. Father Jenkins, you've participated in the March for Life in Washington, D.C., and have been a very outspoken proponent of the pro-life movement. What is your opinion now? What have we seen since 1989? Are you encouraged by this march in April, and the Life March in April, the recent legislative movements in Idaho and Louisiana? How do you regard these?
Well, Julius, of course, I'm encouraged by any progress that is made toward protecting the life of unborn children. And I do think there has been some progress made, although it has been, I think, somewhat superficial. The problem that we meet, though, is that the principles underlying abortion are not being addressed. They tried to meet them in Louisiana, but they were blocked by a so-called pro-life governor who wanted exceptions made. Well, as long as you make exceptions in your legislation to protect the unborn, you are basically denying the principle, as Father Kelly says, that the unborn child is an innocent life and you can't kill it for any reason. Once you admit an exception, you've destroyed the principle, and you've set the stage for the destruction of any life, for any reason that is deemed socially acceptable. The problem with euthanasia also is that it is based upon the abortion idea that life is expendable, that we can define the value of human life according to how it is viewed socially, whether in the eyes of society or, let's say, the mother or doctors or whoever, an individual person's life is of any value. What is the difference between that idea and the classification by Stalin of people as useless eaters, or Marx as useless eaters, people who just are in the way? They're just consumers and they contribute nothing, so we should get rid of them. The unborn child in the womb is subject to being judged by the medical establishment and by his mother or relatives as to whether or not they want him. And whether they want him or not determines whether or not his life has any value. Well, as soon as you admit that principle, then everybody is expendable, depending upon who is in the driver's seat, who is empowered to make that judgment, and what he considers to be valuable to him personally or not. What we're going to see is a euthanasia movement growing, at the very same time that people are saying that there's no essential difference between the life of an animal or a plant and a human being. It all depends on how useful he is to a certain group of people who control the machine, who have their hand on the switch. And when that happens, it's going to be hell on earth.
I think it's important, Julius, in the context of all it is, to bear in mind that we as human beings have an obligation to obey the moral law. We have an objective standard of morality. We, as St. Paul and other saints have said, that the natural law which is nothing more than the rational creature's participation in the eternal law of God, is written in the hearts of men. And that when we commit sin, when human beings have abortions or murder elderly people, their conscience bothers them. Guilt sets in. They know it is wrong. We have to bear in mind also that God has revealed to men certain revealed laws, the Ten Commandments, divinely revealed to men, which we have an obligation to obey. And this is precisely what this world in which we live today wishes to deny, wishes to sever itself from any authority imposing rules and laws upon themselves.
Father Jenkins.
I was talking to a former member of the Peace Corps who had worked in Africa one time. And I had mentioned to him that I was interested in going to Africa as a missionary. And his response was surprising to me. Father, you don't want to go there. I said, what do you mean? He said, I'll tell you a story. He said, I was driving down the road, and I saw a carcass, a bit of carrion by the side of the road, being picked apart by birds. Cars were driving past it as though it meant nothing to them. When I got up to it, I saw that it was a human body, lying there by the side of the road, dumped there, to be devoured by beasts. He said, there's no respect for life. I said, how did you know it was a human being if the body was so badly decomposed and so badly eaten? He said, there's no mistaking a human hand. He said that this country is the one of the few countries in the world where there is respect for human life, where if someone's life is taken from him by force, it is considered to be a major problem. In other countries of the world, he says, it is routine, that one's life is always in jeopardy because there is such blatant disregard for the value of human life. Now, if in this country we are losing that respect for human life because we no longer see man as a creature of God who has been constituted in his own image and likeness with an eternal destiny, but he's merely a commodity, he's merely a unit of some social mass, or he is simply an animal and no more, then this world is in very serious trouble.
That's the essential difference. Either you do or you do not believe that man has an immortal soul. If you believe he does, then he is essentially different from every other living thing on the face of the earth. If you believe he does not have an immortal soul, if you think the difference between a man and other animals is his brain and the location of the molecules and the cells of the brain, if you think that's the only difference, then there is no difference. I mean, we do not lament, for example, the death of a dolphin. We don't anyway. There are people who do, as if it were the death of a human being. But if a dolphin dies, or if a shark dies, or if a guppy dies, we do not lament the death of a shark and fail to weep at the death of a guppy because the brain of the shark is more advanced than the guppy's. I mean, it's insane. The essential difference between man and animal is that man has a spiritual soul, an immortal soul, which makes him in the image and likeness of Almighty God. That is what gives him rights, God-given rights. That is why we have rights. And that is why it is as evil to murder an unborn child as it is to murder a college professor or an old man. It makes no difference, because each of them, the unborn child, the college professor, the old man or the old woman was not able to take care of himself or herself. They all have immortal souls. They're all made in the image and likeness of God. And to take their lives, innocent lives, is murder. If you do not accept that man has an immortal soul, then you have no dignity above the dignity of a dog or a cat or a pig or an elephant. There's no essential difference.
You're watching What Catholics Believe.
You know, Julius, the current flap about morality in the arts and funding by the National Endowment for the Arts is a good gauge of the morality of the country, too. Because the National Endowment for the Arts has helped to fund some of the most obscene, degrading specimens of, well, what purports to be art that are imaginable. I mean, a man urinating is a form of art, is an art form. Someone smothering herself or coating herself with chocolate, an unclothed woman coloring herself with chocolate. This is considered to be an art form. And I think that is a very good gauge of the moral state of the Union, to see people actually degrading themselves and calling it art. The problem that we come down to is that man does not want to submit himself. We find an art, a piece of art on display in a major museum which consists of a crucifix submerged in a container of human urine. And the title of this artwork is unspeakable on television. This is an art form. But when you get down to movies like The Last Temptation of Christ and this particular work of so-called art, and so many other absolutely impure and obscene artworks today, what you find is the absolute rebellion against order and dignity. You find the reason why mankind makes such a stand on Jesus Christ in such a way that it has no other stand comparable about any other so-called God, like Allah and Buddha and so on. You don't find great love for these characters, and you don't find great hatred for these characters. People talk about Buddha, and they talk about Allah, but I've never heard of anyone who says he has a great love, personal love for Allah, or a great personal love for Buddha. Nor have I ever heard of anyone who says he has a great personal hatred for Allah, or a great personal hatred for Buddha. But about Jesus Christ, people have to make a choice. And the reason why they have to make a choice, and why they either hate him or love him, is because he's real. It's because he's not a made-up God. He's not a cardboard God. He's real. And he's so close that he came within arm's reach. And because he is so close to us, and because he stands there, loving us and demanding that we love him in return and that we obey him, that is why people hate him. And this has a lot to do with the moral state of this union, because no one on the face of the earth can be indifferent toward Jesus Christ the way he can be indifferent toward other gods. We see this in the apostasy of many Catholics today, who can't just walk away from the Catholic Church and forget about it. They're always looking back and saying something nasty to justify what they've done. Their consciences bother them. They cannot be indifferent toward Jesus Christ. They either have to love him and obey him, and if they're not willing to do that, then they hate him.
Let me just say, before you say that, it's sort of an addition, an addendum, a slight addendum, it'll be short, to what Father Jenkins has said. You will notice that from a state of gross immorality, that is, from a state of disobedience to God's law, there is now a movement to a state of hatred for God, hatred for Jesus Christ. And that hatred, in some instances, is being paid for by the federal government of the United States. The federal government is giving money to people who make it part of their zealous profession to heap blasphemy on Jesus Christ, the Son of God. The U.S. government is paying these people. And if the American people do not stop that, this nation should perish.
I think to bear in mind and to keep it in context is to remember that we live in an era today in, let's call it the post-Christian era, where society at large, the faith has been eclipsed from the faithful. I think it was G.K. Chesterton that said something to the effect that the sad part, or the sad thing about an atheist is not that he doesn't believe in something out there, a God, a deity, is that the sad part about an atheist that he will believe in anything. And as it is with mortal sin, all moral theologians will say that a person who commits mortal sin, either you will turn towards God or you will turn towards something created by God. And if the society at large rejects God, rejects our Lord Jesus Christ as the Redeemer of the human race, he will believe anything. He will believe in euthanasia, abortion, animal rights, all of these things. It's an insane asylum. I mean, animals do not respect my rights when they come into my yard. How can I possibly assign a right to this dog when he sees the fire hydrant next to my property? You know, it's insane. You know, we are human beings. We have the use of reason. Man is distinguished from animals is that man has the use of reason. He has an immortal soul, as Father said. He is of a higher spiritual nature. Well, obviously, he has a soul to save. Animals do not have immortal souls. And when they die, they are dead and they are buried. You know.
My question is this. I think some of the moral state can be gauged by the reception given to two individuals recently in the United States. Specifically, Mikhail Gorbachev, who is obviously a self-professed communist, who loves the French Revolution, who loves the Russian Revolution, and Nelson Mandela, who came out and said that his heroes are Fidel Castro, Muammar Gaddafi, and Yasser Arafat. And in spite of this, by and large, everyone loves them. And I would even venture to say that they are more loved and respected in this country than our Lord Jesus Christ.
I think the problem is that with the moral degradation of the American people, they have lost their capacity not just to think, but to make judgments, sound judgments. And so, for example, the people will pick up the newspaper and they'll read an article, and they won't know what to think about the article, whether the individual that they're writing about is good or bad. But if the article, say, for example, in the New York Times calls him a dictator, says that he is ruthless, he is bad, he's no good, he is to be despised, they'll finish the article, they think they're making a judgment, they're not making a judgment, this man is bad. However, they could write an article about someone and make no judgment, people will make no judgment. They write an article saying this one is good, this one is good. Now, there are a lot of people, conservative people, for example, who contend that the truth is being hidden from the American people. And I dispute that. I do not think the truth is being hidden from the American people. If you read the New York Times day to day, the New York Times gives the facts. It was the New York Times that printed huge photographs of Nelson Mandela when he got out of prison with a hammer and sickle in front of him. And then within 2 weeks, they printed a photograph of Nelson Mandela clutching the hand of the head of the head of the Communist Party for South Africa, with the big hammer and sickle behind him. It was the New York Times very prominently that quoted Nelson Mandela saying how much he loved the Communist Party and how much he loves communists and how they are comrades in this revolution. But when they printed those pictures and those statements, they didn't print them in the context of being bad. And so the American people read it. They are not programmed to think it's bad, and they say, well, nothing. They read the other articles where they make Gorbachev into a great hero and Nelson Mandela into a great hero, and he's a great hero. He's a messiah. He's wonderful. They don't think of the fact that, as we mentioned in previous programs, that Gorbachev is the head of a system that has murdered more human beings than any system in the history of the world by tens of millions. And Gorbachev very proudly, and again it's printed in the New York Times, proclaims, I am a Leninist. I am a committed communist. He doesn't deny it. He doesn't
Makes
shy
no
away
bones
from
about
it.
it.
He says it clearly in a straightforward way, but the one who writes the article doesn't say, this is bad. And so the American people, there's no response. I think that is a reflection of the moral state of the Union, a certain inability to differentiate between what is good and what is bad.
Father Jenkins.
I was not so shocked at the American public's reception of Mandela as I was by their reception of his wife, Winnie. Not too long ago, she was convicted of having been the ringleader in a group that kidnapped 4 young black men in South Africa and beat one of them to death. And those who survived said that she was the first one to beat up on them with sticks and bats. And it's because they were accused, in the eyes of Winnie Mandela, of having cooperated with the South African government. She also has gone on record as recommending the necklace as solving South Africa's problems. You know what the necklacing is? Necklacing is where they take someone who is thought to cooperate with the government, to tie his hands behind him with barbed wire, put around his neck an empty tire, a rubber tire, pour into it diesel fuel and set it on fire and watch him writhe in pain. And soon the rubber fuses to his flesh and he's just left there to burn to death, writhing in the street. This woman recommended that as a solution to one of South Africa's problems. And yet in New York people were crying, Winnie, Winnie, as though she were a great hero. But you know, Julius, there are a lot of good people out there. And I think this program is reaching them.
This has been What Catholics